Good morning. Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green, and today we're walking and rolling for a serious cause. Some might say it's misunderstood. They hear so many statistics. What's fact from fiction? And that's brain injury. And so today I'm lucky to have in the studio Nicole Godair, who's the executive director of the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts. Good morning.
Thank you for having me here today.
Oh, you bet, because the more I dug into this, the more I realized not everyone understands this issue. You serve can we call it the BIA, Brain Injury Association? It's a lot easier to say. The BIA of Massachusetts, you serve how many people approximately a year?
In a given year, over 14,000, and we're really here to support the thousands of brain injury survivors, family members, and medical professionals that support brain injury survivors here in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and that's what's important. It's not just the survivor, it's a caregiver, which you often hear for many injuries, because we're going to talk a little bit about later about what's covered by insurance and what's not. But brain injury is not a short-term issue for the most part. We need to think of it more as a long-term issue. People, however, function very well, correct, in society?
Yes.
They go out, they have jobs, they do.
Correct. And a lot of brain injury survivors, at times, they may have fatigue, trouble problem solving, difficulty making decisions, trouble organizing thoughts, memory problems, difficulty finding words. But a lot of brain injury survivors, after they've had a concussion, a stroke, or other type of brain injury, there are many that can go back to work, and then there's some other individuals that need more enhanced supports to live in the community.
So there's so many things when you think about brain injury. There's obvious ones. You think about motor vehicle accidents. You think about people falling, maybe mostly seniors falling, stroke, concussions, which has been very big in the news, and then some other issues that we're going to talk about that aren't talked about as much. So before we go into this, the Walk and Roll event is coming up in Framingham on September 23rd. What time does it start?
9:30 starts registration, and the walk kicks off about 11.
And it's at Framingham
State University at the Maple Street field track.
Okay, it's the fourth year you're doing it, and it's very important to raise the money because you have 50 support groups. You work with clinicians, correct? They've come to you and said, I read that they've come to you and said, we think we need more certification in brain injury.
Exactly. The Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts has many programs in which we educate clinicians, doctors, nurses, and then we do a lot of support services for survivors and then also their families.
And you do all this with how many staff?
So we have about 20 staff, but we have a huge network of volunteers and supporters in the community that allow us to do the programming all across the state.
And because of those, you can there's funds that can be shared in some cases with the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission and some other places, other organizations that you can work with. But you run about 50 support groups.
Yes,
right?
So the Brain Injury Association, we have 50 support groups all the way down from Berkshire County, Central Mass, North Shore, all the way down to the Cape and Islands.
And it's an incredibly big job, and the number of people that it affects is what? Nationally, it's...
So nationally, it's about 5.5 million people that are living with a brain injury. Here in Massachusetts, every year there's about 100,000 people that get an acquired brain injury. So that's everything inclusive of a metabolic disorder, stroke, traumatic brain injury, but specifically here in Massachusetts, which oftentimes we hear a lot of people talking about traumatic brain injury. Here in Mass, there's about 67,000 individuals each year that get a concussion.
But what's interesting is, with traumatic brain injury, and it's not just concussion, right? It's also
Correct.
It's not just sports concussions, which people think about, and it has been on the news and a very important topic. And the NFL even changing some of their rules of when the players can go back and concussion checks. We hear about it with Tom Brady and all sorts of things, which is a good thing. But traumatic brain injury, the statistics are hard to interpret, correct? Because not everyone goes to the ER.
So what I would probably say, so the Department of Public Health, I think, does a good job in reporting the statistics that are known. If you do go into the emergency room, if you are admitted, those numbers make up that 100,000 acquired brain injuries. If you go to your physician, you go to a local Minute Clinic or some of those other clinics, they're not mandated to do the reporting. So the numbers that we know about are really only a small portion of the population here in Massachusetts that have brain injuries or that we know of.
Right, because, and you think of football, but also soccer came up a couple of years ago when I was a soccer player, and heading the ball on your head. They were there was data, talking about the increase of head injuries in students who were playing soccer as well because of the ball hitting their head, et cetera. So, it is a big issue. And the sad thing is so many people, it is underreported because they go home. And the parents, they might be dizzy, they might have a headache, they might be nauseous.
Or sometimes you could even have an elder who might fall down and, and then you get seen by the medical community or family. You might think it's a cognition issue. You might think it's Alzheimer's. You might think it's dementia. But really, when the elder fell down and broke their hip, they also could have hit their head. So sometimes, brain injury can be disguised as other things if you don't know what to look for.
All right. So how about prevention programs? Because you offer so many programs that it's mind-blowing to me. So let's break it down. Let's talk about the Think Ahead program that the Brain Injury Association.
So the Think Ahead program is a program that we do in the schools. We educate students from age 1 all the way up to high school. We educate over 9,000 students every year. We go into the schools and we talk about helmets, safety belts, and really ways in which that kids can be safe in their communities. We also talk about alcohol and substance use, and then also concussion. So our prevention programs, they're free to the community, so you can reach out to the Brain Injury Association if your school or if you're interested in your child having education about being safe as it regards to brain injury.
Can you give me an example of maybe something you've done with a school in Massachusetts that, it can't not be effective because you also work with coaches, trainers, right? How does it happen? Do they come to you? Do you come
So
in?
actually, the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts, we can do programs in the school. We can do smaller programs in the classroom, or we can do bigger auditorium-style classes.
Can you give me an example of maybe one that you've seen?
So in the past, I know a couple of years ago when I had gone to one of them, in some of the classes, we've done a scenario of an egg drop. With some of the elementary school kids, they used an egg to simulate what it would be like if the egg dropped without a helmet. So there are some interactive things that we do with the students depending on the age level. And then when it comes more around the prom season, we might do something more about drinking and driving and being safe on the roads.
And the feedback must be terrific. What's the feedback you've been hearing from some schools?
So, all the schools, typically we get great feedback. A lot of the schools invite us back on a year-to-year basis. And given the fact that we're educating over 9,000 students on a year-to-year basis, I think speaks to, the value that our programs have and what our prevention team offers at the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts.
9,000 kids.
Yep.
Unbelievable. Now, you do another program that you work with the courts on.
Yep.
For
So we
DUIs.
have our Brains at Risk program. And so if you might have been out in the community, might have been driving too fast, might have gotten a driving infraction, you might have... Ticket. You could have gotten a DUI or OUI driving under the influence. Your probation officer judge can refer you to the Brains at Risk program that we have at the Brain Injury Association. And it's a 2-hour program in which we educate people about how to be safe and, what could have happened to you and it taking unsafe measures on the roads. So that is a great program that we have. And then we do some other diversion programs as well for the younger age youth as well.
And when you say younger age youth diversion, what do you mean by that?
Sometimes, there could be a town or a local community where some kids might have gotten in trouble for, for drugs or some other things. And so instead of sending them to jail or, having an official record, there have been times that we've worked with some local DA offices on educating students about how to keep safe and how to make better choices.
Wow, that's a good thing because they're talking now about even not wanting to send certain kids to jail. They're thinking, or to juvenile, they're thinking of let's find a way to keep them out of, because of the expense of the prison system and the juvenile system. What can we do to keep them at home and and continue to prevent?
So over the last 20 years, the Brain Injury Association has worked on our prevention programs, and the reality is prevention really is the only cure for brain injury.
That's well said. Now, what about, we talked about this earlier because I had no idea, but there's a fee when you get a speeding ticket. Now, I would know nothing about that, of course, but there is apparently, you had mentioned to me, there's small text on the bottom of a speeding ticket. And what does it say?
So,
In Massachusetts.
So in Massachusetts, on every speeding ticket on the bottom, it's called HITS. It's called Head Injury Treatment Services Trust Fund. And so if you get a speeding ticket in Massachusetts, $50 goes towards the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission. It goes to the Commonwealth. It pays for case management and brain injury services for people with brain injury here in the Commonwealth. Also, if you get an OUI, operating under the influence, driving under the influence, $250, so 100% goes to the state, and that's also to support people with brain injury. So anytime, if you happen to be driving faster than normal, or maybe you were under the influence, there are fines that go to the state that really support people with brain injury.
How long has that been going on?
So I would probably say probably like around like the mid-90s, I think is when it had been set up, and there's probably over about $7 million, if not more, every year that goes to really support people with brain injury services. The state manages the fund. It's managed through the Mass Rehab Commission. And then at the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts, we do a lot of public policy work. So our job is to make sure that brain injury survivors all across the state have access to programming, support, and services through providers that serve people with brain injury.
And I do want to talk about what's happening at the State House, because this is a good thing. Okay,
Exactly.
We could talk about positive things happening in government, which I love. But before we get to that, the other thing is, so wait a minute, as my producer Kyle said behind me earlier, was, wait, so if I get a speeding ticket, there's a positive note in that? And I guess if you want to look at it that way, yes. I mean, some of the money, we get upset. Some people get frustrated that they say the cost has gone up, but maybe some of that money is doing just so you know, some of that money is doing some good. Now, when we talk about concussions, again, there's been a lot of press on this, but there was a quote that I found that I think speaks to this issue straight on, hits it head on. And Ted Johnson, who used to play for the Patriots, in case anybody doesn't know, he also went to college with me. I'm a little bit older than he is, Ted Johnson. And he went out a couple years ago, and I know you involve many, many community members of all types in your programs, but Ted had gone out to some schools on behalf of the Brain Injury Association to discuss his own battles with concussions. And there was a quote saying this: I want people to know, this is Ted speaking, I want people to know about the danger and long-term effect of multiple concussions because I didn't. If I had known the dangers, I could have made better decisions about staying in the game or getting out. And I know the BIA, the Brain Injury Association, works with coaches and trainers and kids. Do you think people are getting it? I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but do you think people are? I know at the NFL level, like we talked about, they're increasing they're strengthening their policies of concussion protocol, they call it. What do we see happening in Massachusetts?
So what I would say is, I think here in Massachusetts, I think we're luckier than any other state across the country, and that's not just because I live in Massachusetts, but Massachusetts really has great systems and support in place. There's always been great collaboration, talking about the services that are needed here, and I think the reality is, I think we've seen the uptick in the media the last couple of years, as well as in veterans and sports concussion. So I think there is a dialogue about sports concussion, how to keep our kids safe, and also other sports as well. And, I think now the piece is really, how do we tie the messaging about sports concussion and making sure that all people with brain injury are supported no matter how you have the injury. But Ted Johnson did do a lot of programming for us in the past, and he was kind of really out there supporting the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts mission, talking about awareness and how to keep kids safe.
Because you hear all too often, again, that especially when kids are looking up to professional athletes of all kinds, they are watching what they're doing. And it's often reported that, with CTE, the new, folks that are NFL players that have passed have donated their brain for science, and now they're coming up with some pretty important, though gruesome information that I think is hopefully making an effect. And hopefully the more that we talk about it, the more, if there's a coach listening, a teacher listening, and maybe they don't have the Brain Injury Association coming into their school, they can contact you, and your local office is in Westboro, and we'll give out the information at the end. But anybody listening who wants to get a program going, maybe a one-day or program going, it's not just the prom. It's not just the crash car outside that they're doing to stop accidents. This is stuff that happens all year because there's so many types of brain injuries. Now, what about community partnerships? I know that you have a corporate sponsor here, Seven Hills, which is in Worcester, which is a very large organization, and others.
So the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts, about 70% of our funding comes from the state so that we can do prevention programming, like our Think Ahead programs, that we can also provide resources and support and connect people to resources. Just as an example, here in Worcester County, Worcester specifically, I know you mentioned Seven Hills. Seven Hills is a corporate partner of the Brain Injury Association. They do a lot of brain injury programming here in Worcester. BMZ, which also stands for Brockton Area Multicultural Services.
Say that 10 times fast.
Brockton Area Multicultural Services. They actually have a new brain injury program that's right across the street from the public library. That funding was increased through Senator Harriet Chandler's efforts because she's a big supporter of brain injury and services here in Worcester, but all across the state as well.
And what's across from the Worcester Library is a clubhouse.
Correct. It's a New Start Brain Injury clubhouse. It's specifically for individuals with brain injury, which is new, and it's one of the first of its kind in the Commonwealth.
And we get to have it here in Worcester.
Yep.
And that's due in large part to our local legislators, which then brings us to the point of money and funding these programs. And you have to have support. And in this case, we have our state senator from Worcester, Harriet Chandler, who's a Democrat, who's been involved in so many things. She was Senate president. As some people listening may or may not know, she is no longer. She was filling in. And then Representative Kim Ferguson, who's a Republican out of Holden, who you mentioned to me is also...
She's also a speech-language pathologist, and that's actually how we had gotten her interested in the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts funding, and then also working with Senator Chandler to make sure that we're increasing awareness about brain injury and the services that are really needed in our communities.
And when you say increasing awareness, I think it goes beyond that. I mean, you do so much work as an organization and you yourself at the State House and advocating for insurance coverage. And I know there's a bill pending. Did you say it's still in committee or it's coming out of committee?
It's actually still in committee, and then we'll be refiling in January. That bill is a cognitive rehabilitation bill, and the intent of that bill is to really ensure that anybody that's on a commercial insurance plan, that they have access to rehabilitation after their brain injury.
Because what was surprising to me was it all depends on, obviously, how they're diagnosed. If somebody gets in a car accident and breaks two legs and an arm, they're going to get coverage for that, right? But let's say they develop cognitive issues. They're having speech issues. They're dizzy. They're this. So but say they need rehab in their speech. Is that covered? Maybe, maybe not, right?
So it depends on the insurance plan, depending, there are some brain injury survivors that get access to PTOT and speech. Some get it for a limited time. Where it becomes a little bit more difficult is, physical therapists might get time with an individual to, help, with a leg injury, but they don't always have time with that same individual to help them cognitively, how do they do certain aspects, or, how do they walk to the mailbox and then get their mail at the same time. So there's this cognitive piece that oftentimes the rehab that's provided from the insurance companies, there isn't enough time to work on the cognitive piece as well to make sure that all systems are working and moving. Sometimes there's a lot of brain injury survivors, after they're admitted to a hospital, they end up at a rehab. Unfortunately, with the way the insurance works, there are times if you can walk to the elevator, then you're discharged. But that doesn't necessarily mean that someone's cognitively aware and they know how to really interact and how to live their life in the community afterwards.
And that's scary, because what if they can't walk to the elevator, but then they rehab out of whatever their broken bones were and their injuries, and they can walk, but maybe they're having brain function issues and they're driving.
And that's the thing. At the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts, we believe that all brain injury survivors, no matter how you occurred or how you got your injury, should have access to rehab.
Now, you had mentioned to me years ago there was a time when there was almost no coverage for what was considered a brain injury. So how far have we come?
So, what I would say, the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts, we were incorporated in 1982 by one of our founders, Marilyn Spivak, who started the national movement. In the early 80s, there was no state agency to support people with brain injury. At the time, it was just about in the early 80s when people started surviving their accidents. There were some medical advancements. So our agency created the statewide head injury program, which is through the Mass Rehab Commission, to make sure that when and if someone had a brain injury, specifically a traumatic brain injury, that they could reach out to the state, get some supports, and whether or not it's through residential program, vocational rehabilitation, case management. So in the last 30 years, state agencies were created to support people with brain injury, whereas 30 years ago there was no support for families in the community.
So what agencies? I mean, Mass Rehab's been around.
Mass Rehab's been created for many, many years, but within Mass Rehab, there's a department called the Statewide Head Injury Program. From an acronym standpoint, we call it SHIP, and that's where all that HITS funding, the speeding tickets go to support people so that they work with a lot of providers in the community, like the example you brought up, Seven Hills, BAMSI, other brain injury providers, as example, like here in Worcester, that support people with brain injury. The Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts, we have local support groups. Our job is to make connections for brain injury survivors in their community. We're not a direct service provider, but we're really the organization out there making sure that there are funds so that other organizations can support people with brain injury.
And not only do you coordinate these groups, but you're basically saying that you're the link between finding the funding, and then you're also probably advocating with insurance companies and helping the state legislators help you with that. And I'm sure it's not just in Worcester, but we are very lucky to have what we have. And especially, I don't get political on this show, but this is an issue that is not political. This is strictly bipartisan. This is brain injury, and Senator Chandler is a Democrat. Kim Ferguson, Representative Ferguson and Holden is a Republican, and it doesn't matter. They've both been quoted as saying that this is not a political issue in any way, shape, or form. We need to fund this. And even with just the commission, if anybody knows anything about the State House, even if there's no money coming out, but that commission is formed and there's legislators on that, that's a message saying what?
So, and I thank you for bringing up the Brain Injury Commission. It was originally established back in 2011. We just got it reestablished, so it's really it was an opportunity through the legislature, through Senator Chandler's support and Representative Ferguson, that now we're going to be able to reestablish the commission, talk about our services needs, bring in some state agency representatives, some community representatives, some stakeholders, and really talk about where brain injury services are headed here in Massachusetts. How do we create more awareness, and then how do we prevent the injury itself?
So where do you think, I know you're going to be heading this week to multiple meetings with stakeholders of all kinds, clinicians, advocates. Actually, the one thing I didn't want to forget is that out of your staff, you had mentioned to me, there's a very large percentage of folks who are working with you that have a brain injury. I mean, just because you have a brain injury doesn't mean you're laying down in a bed all day.
And, I think that's one of the exciting things about the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts. We're a very inclusive organization. A percentage of our staff have brain injuries, board members, volunteers in the community. So if you have a brain injury, you know someone or a loved one, or if, maybe you don't even know someone that has a brain injury. If you want to get involved, we have many, many volunteer opportunities to create awareness and to do programming in the community.
I mean, it's really an exciting thing. And again, just the fact that the legislature brought a commission together with no money. They're just saying that this is important, and then they did try and get money into the budget, and Governor Baker did sign, obviously, the 2019 upcoming fiscal budget, where you did get a good amount of funds. Not quite what you asked for, but a good amount of funds.
Yep. So this fiscal year, we were able to increase the state's funds by about $750,000 for increased funding for brain injury services that the state will manage.
And of course, I don't want to, instigate a war here about people getting more speeding tickets, but obviously the fee is a good thing. So before we wrap up, let's again talk about Walk and Roll. It's coming up, is that a Sunday? Sunday, September 23rd in Framingham, at Framingham State, and registration is at?
Registration's at 9:30. If you go to our website, it's BIAMA.org.
BIAMA.org.
And then you can sign up. If you do sign up ahead of time, we can guarantee you a T-shirt. But if you do come that day, it starts at 9:30. We're going to have some resource booths, some providers out in the community. They'll be there, a lot of survivors, a lot of stakeholders, medical professionals, and really, it's really a day to increase awareness about brain injury.
And anytime you have a walk like that, we had a guest in here from the suicide prevention, the local branch of suicide prevention, because they just had a walk. And, it just being around people that are like you, or caregivers can have someone to talk to and say, oh, let's walk and talk. But when you say walk and roll, is the roll what I think it is?
Yes. So actually, the walk and roll, the reason that we did it that way is, because traditionally we have a good portion of people in sneakers, and then we have a lot of people in wheelchairs, walkers, so we wanted to make sure that our walk, given the fact that we're an organization that supports the disability community, that it was an inclusive walk. So that is exactly why it's called walk and roll.
All right. So hopefully, if people have been listening, we've given them some new information that they may not have known about brain injury. And you may be working next to someone who has a brain injury and you don't know. They may not know. They may have been having headaches, etc. So there is help on the way. Oh, there's help there now. And they can go to your website to contact you. Again, if there's somebody and wants you to come into their school and get someone to provide a program or seminar to talk to the kids, the coaches, the athletes. You've been through this so many times with so many groups that they can reach out to you and try and get help for that. And, I think as Senator Chandler was quoted as saying, again, brain injury is not a political issue. It's the survivors and their families that matter, and prevention. And that's what we talked about. I think I want people to take away from this show is that we need to prevent, and that's your purpose on your website I've seen is the purpose obviously is to prevent this from happening in the first place. Because wouldn't it be nice if we didn't need a brain injury commission or a brain injury association? Wouldn't that be nice? Is that realistic? Maybe not. But anything we can do to get those numbers down and get the insurance companies to cover more of the cognitive function so these people can go back into society and maybe they go to the clubhouse, which is like an adult center where they come and they stay for the day. And again, that's exciting that the first one in Massachusetts is going to be in Worcester, that there's more services and that kids and parents and everyone else, they don't panic, but they pay more attention and they keep their coaches and trainers and teachers accountable for issues. If there's a fall in a school even, that it be taken extremely seriously. So again, I hope if you have time to spare, you can head out September 23rd to Framingham State for the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts Walk and Roll. So thank you for being here, Nicole Goodere.
Thank you very much.
The very busy executive director of the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts. So that's Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. Have a wonderful day. Wonderful day. Wonderful day. Wonderful day.